This episode of the Getting Smart podcast is a recording of our annual What's Next in Learning town hall, where Getting Smart team members share what we're going to be thinking about in 2025, and the live audience helps us to calibrate what's the most urgent. Be sure to check it out if you weren't there, and if you have any stories to share that relate to any of the themes mentioned in the episode, or full show notes, be sure to email me at mason@gettingsmart.com. That's mason@gettingsmart.com. All right, let's jump into the episode.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our annual What's Next in Learning Town Hall. I'm Mason Pasha with Getting Smart. So these are the trends that the Getting Smart team has identified as things that we're going to keep talking about, keep thinking about, and we're going to dig into some of them a little deeper today. Both making the case for why now, like why are these trends that we spotted, as well as what are some things that we're seeing that are really starting to perk our ears up at what's possible in each of these spaces. So a lot of things I just said. We've got artificial intelligence, governance, signals of learning. We've got literacy, new models for learning, authentic experiences, enrollment, and teacher prep being something that's super important as well. And then just throwing this in right before we jump in, we recently published a blog series on our Getting Smart design principles. So we say that our goal as an organization is to try and ensure that every child has learning experiences that are accessible, challenging, purposeful, authentic, personalized, and joyful. So we've got a blog series that outlines those in more depth, but this is maybe a useful overlay to view everything we're talking about today. Like we're really trying to intercept these trends and ensure that what comes afterwards has all of these elements. All right, so we are going to kick off here with Nate on AI. So Nate, take us away.
All right, hello everybody. Happy 2025. This is my favorite town hall of the year because I love talking about the things that we're thinking about, but more importantly, I love to get your reaction and see what are we missing, what should we be thinking about this year at Getting Smart, and what should the world be thinking about. So the why is pretty obvious probably to all of us, but I just want to throw a few different stats out here. Is that the first why is that more students and teachers are using AI, and we know generally in the world more and more people are using AI. Tons and tons of data out there on this. I thought a couple of interesting indicators. The Center for Democracy and Technology talked a lot about, this is from 22, 23, 23, 24, and you can only predict what will happen in 24, 25. But the student discipline as a result of generative AI use has increased 16 percentage points from 2 years ago to last school year, and I suspect will continue to increase. What does that mean? More students are using it, and thus teachers and schools and leaders are saying, what on earth do we do? What does plagiarism look like? Is it okay for students to use this, et cetera, et cetera? How do you teach in a landscape that has ChatGPT and other AI tools in it? Walton Family Foundation, a number of you probably saw this, but more and more teachers are using it, a massive increase in educators using it, ChatGPT and or other tools. And then the last thing, this is from post-secondary and higher ed, but in higher ed, 86% of students that are using AI in their studies in some way. So bottom line is, this thing is here. We all know that. And the big question is, how on earth do we address it? And so I want to talk in my second slide just about what we're seeing as the education world moving forward, and then also the industry. So I'm going to start with education on the bottom, is that we are definitely going to see in 2025 increased efficiency use with things like brisk teaching, magic school. I think more and more districts are adopting these tools and using them effectively to help increase efficiencies in teaching and learning. Second is around policy. I think more and more districts are adopting policies. Teach AI obviously has a bunch of resources on policy if you're looking for policy templates. And then personalization and all the different things that teachers, schools, ed tech, et cetera, are looking for to create this holy grail of, can every learner have some sort of AI-based tutor? And so that's moving forward very fast in 2025. So that being said, I feel like those things are actually way behind what's happening in the front end of AI in industry. And so I just wanted to point out 4 different things in industry that are happening. So some of you might have played around with Gemini Advanced, their deep research. So this is a research tool that if you pay their monthly fee, you get access to. And it does a lot of research on at least publicly available documents. So not anything that's password protected, it won't get access to, which causes all sorts of things with bias and access. But research tools, so things that are in education that are research oriented for students, deep research will do them in really effective and quick ways. Number 2 is if you haven't seen any of the new VO2 generation from video, this is text to video. So a student can enter a set of text prompts and customized video generated by AI will come out that is unique and original to that particular set of text. So what we are imagining in 2025 is massive propagation of personalized video and created video that's created at very low cost and text-based. So thinking about the creative potential there, but also the mass inundation of media in students' worlds who are already inundated with media. Third trend that we're seeing that's way out in front of where we think schools are thinking is this idea of companionship. And some of you might have seen the company Friend, which supposedly is launching in 2025. They're trying to raise some money. But this is a pendant that sits around a person's neck and is essentially acting as an AI companion all time, 24 hours, where it can interact with the individual. And in this case, students, if you can imagine what would happen if in their AirPods or in their necklace, they always had access to information, AI information. And then finally, the big one, we've written a little bit about this, is that just this idea of agentic behavior, AI tools that are doing things for students and doing things for teachers autonomously and not with step-by-step directions like you do in current bots. So the rise of agents is the most important thing that we're going to see in 2025. This trend, there's a lot going on in education around efficiency policy and personalization, and there's way more that's farther out that we need to be thinking about. How is this dramatically going to shift the education landscape?
Nate, on the subject of agentic AI, in that category of personalization, I think guidance and support is an emerging category. I think we have George Tang on from Vicela. George, is your new startup in the guidance space? You want to say anything about that trend?
It is, Tom, and we're excited to see where and how we can build agents to be able to both elicit authentic student voice, but then agents to then modify open responses from students to then develop thoughtful profiles and recommendations that end up empowering students to take more ownership over their learning journey.
Thank you. Ian at Schooljoy would agree that voice is a big development. Our friends at Amira, AI-powered reading platform, but emphasis there is on encouraging kids to read out loud. And AI is just in the last year has become so much better at hearing. So multimodal and guidance AI. Thanks, George. There's also some interesting higher ed startups in the guidance space. Our second big trend is, or non-trend maybe, is governance. Maybe the big trend is what is not happening in the governance space. Nate talked about AI, and I would say, other than some late gestures by the federal government, most education and state governments have been slow to respond to it. So I think we're still in a full scramble to understand adequate public policy to protect particularly youth from AI challenges. The big trend here that we're going to see more of this year is just that the devolution from federal to state. We're seeing the end of the unraveling of what started as NCLB. States are stopping testing or making it more optional without really adding much of a governance frame behind it. There's we'll argue in a new paper that'll come out in the next few days. There's an emerging local response, regional response, which is creating new learning goals, usually in a portrait of graduate or a profile of a learner, creating an assessment system around those broader goals, and then developing new and better signals of progress. Nate will talk about all of those. We're excited about that, but it's really a bottoms up approach rather than top down. Gretchen, what else would you add on what we're seeing in governance, or maybe what we're not seeing in governance?
I think I'll just add actually something we didn't talk too much about earlier today, Tom, but it's that I think in the absence of that really clear federal direction and accountability, we have 2 or 3 generations of education leaders who don't know how to lead without that.
That's
like
very
the way
true.
they know to
Almost everybody in the system has grown up in the standards assessment and accountability frame, and our entire mindset is around promoting grade level proficiency and assuming that there's a big hammer if we don't.
Which means every idea I bring as a leader is legitimate because they told me, because it meets this requirement, because whatever. And I just know that my job is to execute that and show up and feel badly about it when you don't like it. but I just think we have a huge leadership gap of people who don't know how to lead without that behind them.
And I guess the other big trend I'll mention is I think we're going to see continuing slow growth of education funding outside the system in the form of vouchers and education savings accounts. And so, Gretchen, there are hundreds of thousands of people thinking outside the system about innovation, but completely outside the context of accountability. And as you and I discussed in the last hour, we're going to start to see that evidence of the problems with so many kids learning outside any form of accountability. But that's not going to be a big story this year. Probably a 2027 story.
Yep, I agree.
But Gretchen, thanks to you and your colleagues for thinking hard about governance. It's a subject that won't get the attention it deserves in 2025, absent a few people like you doing important work. Nate, I mentioned that signals are an important trend. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, so signals, couple big things here. So why do we think these are important in 2025? We've been talking about skills for the last couple of years and more in a variety of ways, and whether those are core skills or that are typically taught in K-12, or they're technical skills that are specific to an industry, maybe found in CTE programs, or our favorite right now, durable and transferable skills. All those things are important. And yet, so what we see in the industry world, so where our young people end up, is that more and more employers are using skills-based hiring. So instead of relying on a proxy of, say, a degree or a college or a high school diploma or something like that, they are more interested in saying, what are the particular skills that this potential hire can have so that they can be best placed in our organization or company. There's a lot of complexities to this, but more and more companies are saying it's important, it's useful, and those that we hire this way last longer and are better employees for us. So that's number one why. I think the second why is that we are seeing the number of portraits of graduates or profiles of learners or learner profiles, whatever you like to call them, it is growing fast. And more states at the national level, districts, schools are saying, here's the North Star for the students in our organization, in our school. And so you have examples like the Future 9 competencies, XQ competencies, durable skills. These are all national level platforms and competencies that have been built out, all of them really elegant and interesting. I put CAS's, Northern CAS's Portrait of a Learner as an example of a school one in the upper right. So many schools are either adapting their state level version, which I put down here in the lower right is Kentucky Department of Education. So we know that a lot of these portraits are growing in the country. And the big worry that we have in 2025 and onward is, do they just remain a poster on the wall? So we think that there's going to be more and more need and more effort to say, how can we credential skills and how can these skills be related to our portraits of graduates? We put out a portrait model on our website around portrait of graduates, supported by the system, supported by a portrait of an educator and leader. Each one of these concentric rings are important to make sure that each child reaches their full potential. What does that look like for 2025 specifically? We think that there's going to be broader use of extended transcripts. These are transcripts beyond what in the typical number one here, the ones that most of us got. If you graduated from high school and or college, you got a transcript that said courses, grades, GPA. So we're going to see more and more examples of extended transcripts. And so clearly the revised CTE model will allow for more industry recognized credentials. And that's been happening for a long time. Sometimes they're on transcripts, sometimes they're not. So we'll see more and more IRCs located on transcripts. I think we're going to see more and more stage number 3, this extended transcripts light version of how do we authenticate, validate, and verify real world learning experiences and other opportunities that young people have earned. And so I put on the top here, this is Ohio. To graduate now from an Ohio high school, you need to have at least 2 seals associated with these 12 seals right here, in addition to your course requirements and other items for graduation. So we're going to see more and more opportunities in more and more states for students to have something else. And sometimes that'll just emerge as a tassel when they graduate or a cord when they graduate. And some of it will be stamped on their transcripts, and some of them will be industry recognized credentials. But we're going to broaden that transcript more and more in 2025. And then we'll see more and more states jumping onto the LER ecosystem. States like Alabama has led the way, along with a few other states, of saying, this is important for our state. We're going to connect post-secondary education with the workforce, with K-12, and we're going to use some sort of digital learning and employment record ecosystem. So based on skills-based hiring, the reaction to that around creating profiles of graduates to document those, and then a way to show those as real signaling on a young person's transcript or learning and employment record is what's going to happen in 2025. All right, literacy. I think this is handing off to Victoria.
Normally, when people hear the words literacy, they typically just think of reading, but literacy is so complex now, given all of the different changes that we've experienced in the last couple of years. So we're going to dive in. We are going to start off with reading literacy. Why? Because low quality resources impact literacy skills. And when we're talking about literacy for reading, we're talking about the essential knowledge and skills to be able to navigate your daily life. Unfortunately, right now, 34% of kindergartners lack the basic skills that they need. And some might even argue, hey, if I'm a kindergartner, I don't really have quote unquote skills going into kindergarten, but that's not true. So those that have access to early education, childhood education, we find that they are in a better position to meet the needs and the demands to become a really great reader. 67% of fourth graders are at or below reading level. We're not here to argue about reading level, but just their level of readiness and their preparedness to move on to more challenging content. When there's a struggle for literacy, we know that inhibits children's access to knowledge, to interaction and socialization, even self-esteem, because they're less inclined to want to engage in activities that require any level of reading. And we know that reading is not just in isolation, but it's going to touch on other content levels as well as those durable skills too. So we're looking at how can we address that? And we're also, a lot of people dropped in the chat, media literacy. Woo! I believe it's Generation Alpha. They are like basically born with TikTok in their brain. And so they are just inundated with the sheer number of hours that our young people are exposed to media and how to navigate that terrain. You wouldn't give a 6-year-old the keys to your car, but we give our 6-year-olds keys to an iPad or an iPhone, and we don't really discuss with them, how is this okay? What are the parameters? So we're really seeing in 2025 how to make sure our young people are thoroughly equipped with the tsunami of information that we place them in every day. This is just a nationwide view of the different legislation that is in support for helping our children have access to how to handle that. I know that somebody dropped in the chat that there was, I think it was in New York, Randy Squire mentioned that there was some policies out in New York. I would love to see that. And if you can link those, that would be even great. So media literacy, the need to make sure that we are supporting our young people. And that looks like how to tell whether or not information is true or accurate, how to critically assess that information, and to even think, oh, is this site legit? Is this picture legit? If it's AI generated, why are there 6 fingers? All of those key things that we're discovering. So our students and our young people need access to that too. We're talking about literacy. We're also talking about civic literacy. I didn't see this one in the chat, but it's now up to 66. So hopefully somebody dropped in the chat civic literacy. There's a demand from our young people who are very socially activated they want to know what it means to be a member of a community, a citizen, to be responsible in that way and how they can do that. And so if we look at the current requirements across the nation in regards to civics, it's not where we quite need to be. And even in those, there's such level of variance. So some states require for students to take questions off of the citizenship test, which if you haven't taken that, I encourage you to, give it a little try, or even it's a very, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Get back to us when you take that test. But our young people are demanding that. So how can we meet that demand? If they're interested in how they can be strong community members and how can they be engaged, that's something that we're seeing in 2025 as well. It was mentioned before with need and AI, but AI education and guidance. This is from our friends at AI for Education. And I think there was somebody who had a podcast with Amanda earlier, and they just put out a wealth of resources. So in 2025, we're seeing the need for the AI guidance. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we need to have some parameters for our young people. Less than half the states have any guidelines whatsoever. And so because of the increase of the reliance on AI and agents and incorporating that into the learning, it's essential not just for our young people, but for our educators, for the policymakers. And it's not limited to also to the families, so they're aware and how to adequately support them. So what we're seeing is we're seeing some really, since it is a concern of ours or a trend that we're seeing, how can you start to, what are the points of access? So with media literacy, we've got some really great organizations that are putting out free resources for families as well as learning institutions that will help you navigate what does it even look like? And the resources are there. And if you're a teacher or educator and you already have an already full plate, a lot of these are things you can just embed into projects and lessons that you're already doing, not a standalone. With civics literacy, we love the work that iCivics is doing. We love what how they're sharing the different ways and the community projects that young people can get involved in. There's a social studies accelerator powered by EdLock, which you don't have to be a social studies teacher to be a part of, but it's a cohort for educators to have access to culturally relevant historical information and how they can provide a more holistic view to history so that students that are normally marginalized in some history lessons can see themselves. And it's not just for certain students. Civics Unplugged, amazing work for civics projects to be funded. And then when it goes to AI literacy, here's just an example of a framework from our friends over at Digital Promise. What I love about it is that it includes portions for creation as well as understanding algorithms and those key aspects of AI so that we're not just consumers, but we're informed members of society in that way. And when it comes to high quality literacy resources, the National Center for Families Learning, I love what they do because they have resources that are free. Literacy does not just impact a young person, it impacts their whole entire family. And we don't want any kind of gaps, and we want families to be a part of that. So we're seeing more and more people take a holistic approach to literacy.
Thanks, Victoria. And as Andy Calkins referenced, the Middle States Association, which is a school accrediting body, just released the first few segments of an AI endorsement. It's really a beautiful framework for teaching AI. Amanda Bickerstaff and I were on the advisory group for that, but we like the idea, an endorsement system or a credentialing system for schools to encourage student, staff, and community AI literacy. All right, I get another negative trend, enrollment. It's down. It's bad. In most public districts, they're down a few percent. We didn't see the big snapback in enrollment post-pandemic in a lot of places. A lot of kids have just left the system for homeschooling, and in the 17 states that have education savings accounts, we're seeing kids leave for private schools, the majority of existing private schools, but a lot of new private micros are being formed. This looks like a permanent trend. The graph on the left, the dotted lines just indicate that each year in the last 5 years, the projections have gone down, and the last two projections have really plummeted. This is not only new competition, but it's also changing demographics. We have fewer teenagers coming through the systems, lower birth rates, and this isn't true everywhere because on the right, you can see a few sunny places are still growing, but particularly the northern latitude states are experiencing a lot of enrollment loss. And one troubling accompaniment is this is a slide that Elon Musk and his PAC were promoting this fall. And I think it's NCES stats. I tried to verify it this morning. I worry that this is an overstatement of the problem, but it does illustrate that the number of kids are in a lot of places shrinking, but that we continue to add administrative staff to the system instead of becoming more and more responsive and leaner and more efficient. We've seen a lot of districts that took a lot of the federal ESSER funds and used it to hire staff, both teachers and administrators, and it's created a real crisis across America. We probably have 36 urban systems that are bankrupt, and we have 5,000 or 6,000 districts that are in really bad shape, that are now way over capacity in terms of facilities and central office services, and not likely to re-enroll students. So we're not going to see a lot of super smart, aggressive responses to this problem this year, but you will see, if you dig in with your local school district, that they probably have a version of this problem that they'll be dealing with this year. So big, it's complicated, it's not going away. Particularly with this new administration, we're going to continue to see more ESAs and more out-of-system learning and choice. Stay tuned.
All right, Tom. Right on the heels of enrollment, if enrollment is down, how does that impact us? As Tom mentioned, there are several states that have ESAs, and then there are several that are on the rise. We are expecting in 2025 to see Texas and Tennessee roll into delivering ESAs for their families. And some of them are going to have some requirements. As we see with Georgia right now, there's a lot of income requirements that are associated with that. So why is that? Why is that a trend? How's that going to impact us? Families are hungry for private and personalized choices for their families and their learners. And then there's new priorities for different families and communities. So they are wanting learning options that meet their needs. Some examples are self-directed models we have with microschools. We have a microschool leader on, a couple of them on right now. I think Tiffany Blassingame, she's out of Atlanta, Georgia. She's a founder of the Ferguson School. They are focused on early elementary, and I'm sure she can attest to the growing list of families and applicants that are trying to get into her school. But we also have ASU Prep, El Mercito out of California, Issaquah, which is a school within a school model that's just located within a district. So if you're familiar with some micro schools in your area, feel free to drop those in the chat. Some new priorities are going to rise up. Like we mentioned, families are hungry for personalized. So it's not enough for my student just to know whatever the specific standards are. Is my child having access to agency? Because that is important to families. Are the skills that they need for them to be an active citizen, are they going to have those opportunities to be engaged with that? And then also with the decline of enrollment, another new model are accelerated pathways for schools. So what does that mean? That means industry recognized credentials. Students should be leaving with industry recognized credentials or apprenticeships or access to some kind of durable skills, or not just one skill set, but access to multiple opportunities to engage with that. And Tom's going to talk a little bit later about that when we talk about experiences. Also, the advancement of P-TECH, which is early college. So for a lot of students walking across that stage or finishing at the conclusion of their high school career shouldn't just be a diploma. It should also be an associate's degree or an internship or whatever the case may be based upon their given interest. So those are some of the trends that we've seen and we're going to continue to see grow in 2025. Speaking of micro schools, we've done a town hall, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, we hope you dive back into that. But the micro school ecosystem is so layered. And so we provided this resource to help people navigate it, that there's access to private tuition-based micro schools. We have those from the homeschooling area segment. We also have public schools that have school within a school offerings, and we have decentralized and centralized options. So we don't want to just treat micro schools as a monolithic. We want to make sure that, and we're going to continue to see the trend of micro schools continuing to grow. Like I said before, when there is a challenge or a change, it is a ripe opportunity for creativity. And that's what we're seeing, and we're going to continue to see in 2025.
Thanks, Victoria. And in a very related trend, I'm super excited that we're seeing more authentic experiences, and I'm happy to have a positive trend to talk about. In addition to new schools being developed, we're seeing a lot more attention on powerful experiences, often community-connected experiences being added to existing schools. Our friends at Digital Promise have a beautiful definition of powerful experiences. My shorthand definition is something you'll remember 20 years from now. It was so formative in the impact that it had on your agency, identity, and purpose that it's resume worthy, it's memory worthy. And you can see their design criteria for powerful experiences are really close to ours. Um, our pandemic book, Difference Making, really got at this idea of school as a place where we invite students into work that matters, real problems important to them. And we're just thrilled to see this idea taking hold around the country. Many of you, we've been working with schools in Metro Kansas City for the last 7 years on this amazing journey of real world learning, where 85 high schools are trying to add more powerful experiences into their model. And also in Kansas City, the CAPS network, which started in Blue Valley, is now up to 120 sites around the country that are inviting students into powerful experiences, community connected projects and internships, entrepreneurial experiences. I think Scott Bess is on the call. Scott started Purdue Polytechnic and is really lighting up the state of Indiana, not only with new Purdue sites, but now on the state board, where he's helped to create a diploma system that invites more powerful experiences. It encourages client projects and internships. We're pretty excited about the growth in P-Tech. That's quietly one of the most important trends in America. And I think you'll see another 50 P-Techs open this year. P-Tech is just an early college that adds work-based learning. So it's an accelerated and applied pathway. Big shout out to Collegiate Education in rural Texas. They've got 21 P-Techs in rural districts. Just a great example that you can create powerful, accelerated, community-connected pathways anywhere. And our friends at Ripen have this very cool client project platform that now 640 colleges are using. So this trend is going to continue to accelerate this year. More kids in work-based learning, more kids in community-connected learning, and both part of it, their school model or part-time options. Because we're so excited about powerful experience for young people, we just published a report on credentialing where we argued that we need better ways to encourage and capture powerful experiences. Nate and Mason built this cool chart that describes the different kinds of powerful community-connected learning, and it comes with a suggestion that you rate the level of that experience in terms of, was it a new or a repeat? Did you do it by yourself or were you part of a team? And so we think capturing and communicating powerful experience is going to be a way to make signaling systems stronger. So thanks to Nate and Mason for this work. You'll see more of this in 2025. What's new in teacher prep?
All right. The chat has already hinted at a lot of these pieces that teacher prep is essential and that some of it is just truly outdated. So let's look at what are some people doing in 2025. We already know that there's a decline in retaining strong principals and strong teachers. This was a challenge pre-pandemic and it was only exacerbated by that. So what are we? We've got Raise the Bar, which is backed by the Department of Ed, and they have funneled quite a bit of money into this program to make sure that there's a diversified teacher workforce. Students learn, there's a lot of support of students learning best from teachers that can relate to them or may have similar backgrounds to them. So we must diversify our teacher workforce and then create a pathway that's sustainable into the workforce. So paying teachers a wage that is a living wage. And even before that, making sure that those apprenticeship opportunities are indeed paid. There are still a significant amount of teacher prep programs that are cost prohibitive as well as time prohibitive. And so if we want to make sure that we have a really strong and robust workforce, some of those are just going to have to change. So we're seeing some really great trends for 2025. The number of registered apprenticeships across the nation have increased. Again, some of those even need to be amended even more. But we also have some really great examples of Nevada State University, College of Education. They are embedding wellness into their teacher prep program. If teachers are not well, then they are not going to be well to continue to do the amazing work that we need them to do. We also have ASU Prep, which has a very unique workforce solution by incorporating the whole community to meet the needs of the classroom. And then we've got the National Center for Grow Your Own model. I know in the chat we've got Erin Moat, who's on, and she does amazing work with the Pathways for Alliance to make sure that we have a really strong workforce. I know that we are close to time, so we are going to keep it moving, and I'm going to pass it off to Mason.
Thank you, Victoria. This was a freaky fast chat, and that is normal. I think we should get Jimmy John's on sponsorship for town halls in the future, because I think they understand something about that. But thank you all for hanging out with us on these trends. I'm going to talk a little bit about what this means for our coverage through the course of the year. And a lot of this is going to rhyme with things my colleagues said. Over the last 3 months, we've been running a series called H3 Learning, which is Horizon 3 Learning. So that's something that we've been really trying to help illustrate the parameters of as we've been exploring many of these incredible things that we've been talking about today, and so many of the things that you all have been sharing in the chat as well. I have a little chart here that kind of shows some of the brief logic map of some of the campaigns that we're running. So we've always got this conversation going on micro schools and credentialing and new pathways. So those three kind of stack into what this next horizon of learning looks like. And over the next year, we're really going to try and run into some of the boundaries of that and see where things cross education into the real world in new and exciting ways. Over the next year, these are going to be some of our themes, and there will be some follow-up, maybe experimental town halls on these topics that are a little bit even more like, hey, bring something cool that you found, let's talk about it for a little while. One that a lot of people have alluded to on this call actually is this setting the foundation piece, which really starts with early education, identity and wellness work, and literacies, reading, media, digital, and beyond. We also have this superhuman category, which I think no one is unfamiliar with who's been to a town hall in the past, but it's really this artificial intelligence supercharging us experience-based learning like Tom referenced, or even upskilling in adult ed. Additionally, we've got governance. Tom talked about this a little bit, but change management seems to be the weakness of so many of these large bureaucratic organizations. And how can we work toward change management in school systems and other systems as things start to change in real time? Public leadership, a term we really like for describing civic literacy that we were talking about earlier. It's how do you show up, participate, and lead? We'll be talking about that a lot more in this coming year. Continued decentralization, that can be a tech term, that can be a governance just broadly, as we talked about power shifting from fed to state levels. And then this piece that I'm particularly bullish on, and I think it's boring and hard to get into for folks, but I think infrastructure is such a huge part of this. To build systems that really work for everyone, we have to think about the school as a city. We have to think about transportation and space design. And we really need to think about connectivity to people and to the great knowledge that is at all of our fingertips. So keep an eye out for those trends. Really appreciate everybody's shares, and we look forward to seeing you intermittently throughout this year. So stay tuned. You'll get something in your inbox next week from us. And until then, keep sharing innovations loudly. Thanks all.
Thanks for tuning in to the Getting Smart podcast today. We want this podcast to be actionable, insightful, and a great way to learn about what's next in learning. In order to stay on the cutting edge, we need people in the field to tell us what they're hearing, what they're wanting, and what they're needing to learn more about. Got a topic or a guest in mind? Send your recommendations to me, Mason at gettingsmart.com. And if you like what you're hearing, don't forget to leave a review in Apple Podcasts or subscribe wherever you listen. Feel free to share the podcast on social media using the hashtag GSPodcasts. Thanks so much.